Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience of SmithWeekly, including Craig S., Paul M., Edward S., and Mike P. On the program today is a new guest. Mr. Michael Navas is with us. Michael is partner at Bolton Boyer Lawyers, a Central and South America-based legal boutique that specializes in many types of services, including business transactions, international setup, immigration, real estate, and other services. Bolton Boyer has a number of offices in the region, with Michael's office being in Managua, Nicaragua. You can learn more via their website, boltonboyer.com. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Michael, it's a pleasure. Good to have you on the program. Of course, we've known each other for, 10 years now. So good to have you on here finally and good to chat and talk about some of your experience and background. Why don't we start off here just with you telling the audience a little bit about your background and experience?
Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in your podcast. As you know, I'm a lawyer. I have a degree in law with studies in both Honduras and Nicaragua here in Central America. I also had the opportunity to take an intensive development program with a focus on business administration at Mendoza College of Business at Notre Dame in the US. And very early in my career, freshly out of law school, I worked for the Nicaragua Institute of Tourism. That was I guess, the most important. Among my first job experience was the most important, where I got to work on the legal side of the tourism industry, participating in the creation of several bills for helping to the development of tourism investment projects, and also coordinating the lobbying efforts for the approval of those bills at the Nicaraguan Congress. About 8 years later, the opportunity presented itself to work with the investment promotion agency of the country called Pro Nicaragua. I think that's about the time that we met, you and I. And as you might remember, Pro Nicaragua was the government official investment promotion agency. So there was a lot of support provided to companies looking at and exploring Nicaragua for investment purposes. And not to make this too long, just trying to highlight my background. After all the experience of working with these institutions of the government, my background experience from a legal perspective is very closely tied to foreign direct investment attraction, business development, country assessments, and startup legal services and offshoring. So yeah.
Michael, that's excellent. Appreciate that. I think that was about the time when we did meet. It was probably back around the 2013 timeframe.
Yes.
Talk just a little bit about Bolton Boyer here as well. Talk about what the umbrella does, if you will, and then include there with what services you provide, and really it's in part geared towards international clients and what those clients are usually asking from you as far as services go.
Well, Bolton Boyer is an international legal alliance of law firms from Latin America. Our law firm here in Managua, in Nicaragua, before we got involved with Bolton Boyer, well, it was basically a family-owned law firm. I grew up in a family of lawyers. My dad, uncles, all my brothers, even my kid's sister is a lawyer. So after I finished my participation at Pro Nicaragua after 9 years, in back in 2014, we decided with my brothers to join the efforts, and well, I became part of the family law firm. And things grew up pretty quickly in terms of foreign clients from there. Our boutique law firm was very focused on in differentiating ourselves from the big law firms. It provided a more hands-on approach as opposed to the very to the cold and sometimes very money-driven approach provided by the big law firms. So we tried always to have a more personal hands-on interaction with the clients, making ourselves available not only to the CEO of the companies but also to the whole staff of the company. Early in 2020, getting into Bolton Boyer during the COVID pandemic, I was contacted by the founders of Bolton Boyer Legal Alliance. And after several meetings and discussions with my brothers, with them, we agreed to join the efforts and become part of the alliance. We did, and we are, and is actually going very strong. Uh, right now, the alliance have offices in Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Paraguay, Colombia, Uruguay, and Spain. The headquarter offices are located in the States, in Florida. From from currently, the legal practice, the, 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 the main focus of the office is to provide corporate legal services. In that is to say, helping with company setup, um, corporate governance management. Helping the companies to we take care of overlooking compliance with management of the government structure of the companies, taxes, of course, which is a biggie, contracts, labor law, tax incentives, and real estates. Particularly, I like working with startups. Helping new business ventures from the get go, from the start. I really get a lot of pleasure working with companies and having the opportunity to see them grow from the very beginning, and have the opportunity to grow with them. And then, it's a very peculiar, good feeling to see them thrive. And so, and among the most sought of after services demanded by our clients, we have obviously company corporations, assistance with corporate governance affairs, and all matters related with human resource management, taxes, and tax incentives, which is a big thing that I'm going to talk to you about later on in our conversation.
Of course, we'll come in and talk more about Nicaragua specifically in a moment, but why don't you just talk a little bit more about why international business and what are driven clients to come and look at international business? And then also, some clients consider relocation or relocating their business or maybe themselves physically. Why can that make sense?
I can tell you from the perspective of Central America, right? Because it's my my turf, where I have most of my knowledge. Central America is very close to the United States. We basically are in the backyard. This is a major thing, not only for American citizens going abroad, but also for people and companies from other parts of the world, such as Europe and Asia, who want to have a very solid access to the U.S. market. So, from that perspective, basically all the countries in Central America offer a very attractive and competitive platform, mainly in the sense in the form of tax incentives. So, I guess this is a very compelling reason for companies to consider going abroad and relocate, you know?
Let's discuss a little bit more here on Nicaragua specifically, because this is an area that we want to highlight and also discuss and give people a real flavor for what Nicaragua is and some of the challenges and some of the good things about Nicaragua. Why don't we just kick that off, Michael, with you talking about Nicaragua generally, just as a country, as a business jurisdiction, and then also, how the economy is there.
Yeah, Nicaragua, well, I have to say, okay, here's a little heads up for you. Obviously, I live here, I'm Nicaraguan, so I'm a little biased, but I'll do my best, as you know me well, to be very upfront and blunt about telling you the situation from our country. There are obviously many advantages and hand that go hand in hand with cons or disadvantages when it comes to considering Nicaragua as your next investment location or platform. Among Central America, Nicaragua offers the most attractive or advantageous tax incentives for investment in many sectors like tourism, sustainable energy generation, agriculture, light manufacturing, business, and knowledge process outsourcing, among others. We also offer the most competitive salaries in the region, which is a good thing always to have. We have a very young human resource pool. And, after about 20 years since Nicaragua started investing efforts and time in attracting foreign direct investment, we have a very talented pool of Nicaraguans, young Nicaraguans. I think it's also fair to mention here that personal security and security, generally speaking, the levels are the highest, when it comes to personal safety among Central America. Even though we have such a bad press, such bad PR, which is, I guess, important to mention that is not without certain justification. But most of the issues that we have in Nicaragua are politically related. We don't have any problems regarding organized crime. We don't have any major issues regarding homicides or drug trafficking, or any of the other things that you see in other places of the world where people tend to be very nervous about traveling to. I think it's also very important to mention here that the access to convenient services. If you go abroad, Andrew, whenever a company is trying to convince you to leave your home and move yourself and your family to another country to act as the CEO or the chief operation officer, I mean, you're going to think about how are you going to do and how is your family going to do it from the perspective of access to healthcare services, education, recreational services. And so Nicaragua has a lot of good stuff in this regard. We have some very good healthcare services here in Managua, in the capital city. So we have some really good schools, bilingual schools, and even universities. You know from a personal experience, Andrew, that from a nature perspective, it's a very beautiful country, and very close to Managua, you have on a radius of about 60 minutes. You have access to volcanoes, active volcanoes, lakes, lagoons, islands, colonial cities, mountains. So yeah, I guess that is also a very compelling reason when you're considering moving abroad with your family, even if that is for a fixed period of time and not. Although it's very funny to mention here that it's very common in Nicaragua that expats who come, who are moved into the country by their employers, end up setting shop here permanently. Now, talking about the cons or disadvantages of the country, as I mentioned before, the political culture in Nicaragua is very tough. The political game that the Nicaraguans play here is very rough, you know, as we say here. And the government, the current government, the current administration doesn't really devote efforts at all in trying to have good PR or to have any efforts whatsoever trying to provide a proper disclosure of their policies or what they're or the the sense behind the decisions that they make. So that doesn't help at all. That doesn't help because it generates a lot of bad press. The Sandinista government has a very no nonsense approach when it comes to dealing with dissent. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. If you think about where they come from and who helped them shape them into what they are back in the 80s. They still have a very close relation with Cuba, with Russia, all the countries, the red countries, the cultures that usually don't generate any good press. And so I guess that would be a good, Andrew, overview of the good things and some of the challenges that we have.
Yeah, let's dive a little bit more into that as well. And of course, as a side note, Nicaragua for the first time was just crowned Miss Universe there in the country. And Michael, to
Yeah.
our surprise, it was indeed Miss Universe. It was a woman. And so that's always good to see. So I think a little bit of national pride is in order there as well. And the culture, obviously, you touched on just a little bit, Michael. The culture is incredible. The food in the country is incredible. There's lots of things to like about the country. The tax regime is favorable. And as you said, the government's fixed in its ways. And I think if people can just understand how to navigate that, I don't see it as a huge hurdle, but you do have challenges. And I guess with that, why don't we talk a little bit about what you started to cover was, basically U.S. relations with Nicaragua, a bit of a cold reception here over the last, call it, really the last 5 years, maybe 6 years. It's gotten a little bit colder, Michael. And also with that, let's maybe talk about other relations that Nicaragua has with, as you started to say, the BRICS, for example, and including China.
You know, setting up shop or trying to set up a business in Nicaragua can make a lot of good sense because it's very cost effective. As I mentioned before, we have this very strategic closeness to the American market, which is no surprise that the US is also the main market, is the main business partner of this country, which is kind of funny because, if you read the press, there's always this ongoing controversy between the Nicaraguan government and the US government. They play this game where in front of the cameras they're not they don't get along, but behind the bushes and behind the cameras they always have ongoing communication all the time. And so this has helped to, in practice, this has helped the private sector here to be able to do their business, conduct their business, you know take advantage of the CAFTA treaty, get access to the US market without any hiccups. So that relation with the US, yeah, so is also has been put through a certain amount of strain recently, since in 2018 we had a major outburst here of people dissenting with the government in matters regarding social security, and it got completely out of hand. The country was locked down by protesters. The interchange of goods between countries in the region was basically on completely on hold because Nicaragua is at the heart of Central America. So anything coming from Guatemala in the north and going to the south in Panama was basically it basically came to a stop. That had very, very awful in the end, that had very awful consequences to the economy of this country. Um, and that derived in the government taking very extreme measures to deal with this dissent and the protesters. In the end, a lot of people ended up dead, many more in jail. And so, as you can imagine, there was a lot of uproar in the international community, signaling the way and denouncing the way that the government handled the whole situation. And so the U.S. And by that back then it was still under the Trump administration. And as you know, the Trump administration, the international policy was very different from previous administrations in the U.S. In the sense that they tried not to get too much involved in international affairs. He was more focused on fixing things inside the states, right? So they basically decided to go down the route of applying sanctions to individuals at the government level instead of putting sanctions on a national level, which they have seen that it just doesn't work. In the end, things remain the same in those countries. We have the example of Venezuela and Cuba. So that was it was very good for business in the sense that the restriction and the punishment was for individuals and not for the country. So the private sector was able to resume their operations and conduct their business as usual, having access to the U.S. market, having access to the Europe market, and so on. Nowadays, the Biden administration continues to be more focused on applying restrictions for individuals instead of, as I mentioned before, on a national level, which is a good thing. It's a good thing because in a way it has worked. You can see that it has had some influence on the way how the government goes about dealing with dissent. Okay, they are by far more careful. They go through, well, at least they try to go through the process of first giving them some sort of a due process, although it's not always ideal. Okay, but it's there. So going back to why would I want to do business in Nicaragua? Why in that country where there's a lot of apparently political controversy? Well, number one, because it's a very cost effective alternative. It could be very attractive for individuals living overseas, like freelance argonauts. The process of setting up a company in Nicaragua is very quick and simple. If you're going to be using this company as an international business company, an IBC, you're going to be exempted from payment of local taxes. There's no paid up capital requirement. There is no minimum requirements on the number of directors or shareholders. We don't have any residency restrictions, so you don't have to be a Nicaraguan resident to be a shareholder to participate in a Nicaraguan company, nor we have any discrimination regarding nationality on the beneficial ownership of the company. Shareholder meetings or board meetings, they don't have to be held locally here in the country. You can hold these meetings over the phone or by any other electronic means. And Nicaragua, as an emerging business jurisdiction, we don't have any legacy issues as other popular business jurisdictions. Like the things that we've seen over the past years in the controversy with Panama, for example, or other places in Europe, tax havens in Europe. So Nicaragua, basically, simply put, is not blacklisted anywhere. We have a very good global market access. We have trade agreements with the United States, Mexico, Europe, and getting into the China question that you mentioned. Nicaragua recently approved back in November a new trade agreement with China. This is something that I wanted to talk to you because I believe it's very important for people abroad or considering doing business in Central America or in Nicaragua in particular. China is a very interesting is having a very interesting effect in the region, in the Central American region right now. They are in the process of setting a very strong presence in Central America. They have currently diplomatic relations with Panama, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua, which is kind of funny because, not too long ago, not even 10 years ago, all of these countries, we had diplomatic relations with Taiwan and not with China. And so, even though the fact that China is putting so much of a big effort in having a strong presence in Central America might create certain fear to certain people, companies. The fact of the matter is that is mostly related to the ongoing conflict that exists between China and Taiwan. Costa Rica was the first of the countries in the region to break the ties with Taiwan and replace it with China back in 2007. And I guess that, at the end, is also no surprise because I believe that all these Central American countries, what they seek, or the goal that they're trying to reach is to have a bigger access to trade, access to a huge market, have new sources of foreign direct investment, financial means for the development of major infrastructure projects. I can tell you about the recent experience of Nicaragua's dealings with China. So aside from the recent trade agreement that I mentioned that was approved in November this year by Congress, China and Nicaragua agree to the development of some very big, at least big for the size of our country, infrastructure projects. Among these, we have a coastal highway, the development of a new coastal highway that is going to connect the central and southern Pacific coast of Nicaragua with Costa Rica. the very important thing about this is that, as you know, Andrew, because this is the region where you used to live here, this is a major beach destination for tourism in Nicaragua and a tourism hub. And to have a highway that would connect all the Pacific coast from the center of the country all the way to Costa Rica is going to open up a big market for the tourism business here. Aside from that, China and Nicaragua have agreed to build a new and a whole lot bigger international airport here in Managua, with capacity for transatlantic connections. Finally, we're going to be able to have direct flights with Europe, or at least to have the infrastructure that is going to allow for those connections to be put in place, and also to work as a major logistics hub for commerce and the transportation of goods. China also has agreed to build a new telecom network, 5G telecom network. They have also agreed to the reconstruction, and I say reconstruction because this is something that used to exist in Nicaragua, although it was abandoned a long time ago. So they're going to rebuild the old railroad infrastructure to connect major destinations in the Pacific coast, mainly Managua, the Masaya, and Granada region. As you know, Granada is a colonial town that is very important because is by far the most important tourism destination in the country. Interesting thing about this railroad project is that the way that they're going to do it is that they're going to also provide a connection to what has been a historically forgotten region in the country, which is the Atlantic coast. The Atlantic coast side, the Atlantic side of Nicaragua is very big, and the population is very low. They represent half of the country, and even though they represent from a geographically point half of the country, the population over there is about 375,000 people, which is very small when you compare it to about 4.5 million that live here on the Pacific side. So I guess that the important thing here is that this railroad is going to connect not only the Pacific, but the Pacific and the Atlantic, which is a very important thing from a historic perspective. And
Yeah.
also, last but certainly not least, China and Nicaragua have agreed to build several energy generation projects, hydroelectric, which represent about 370 megawatts, and thermal, that represents about 150 megawatts. So as you can see, we're talking about a lot of activity that is going to be taking place over the next years here in Nicaragua, Andrew. So there you have it.
Michael, I appreciate that. There's lots of stuff there to talk about. Of course, you and I, living in Central America, South America, no stranger to protests. Obviously they have different scales of severity, as you and I both know, but definitely nobody's exempt from those things happening in their own country at this point. You mentioned the sanctions that the U.S. has levied on Nicaragua, specifically towards the upper end government officials, if you will. You and I both know typically that sanctions don't tend to work that well for the most part because often they can be countered or bypassed, or in some cases
Sure.
have unintended consequences, which we've also seen that. We've seen unintended consequences with respect to the other way around. Nicaragua is not exactly with an empty toolkit, if you will, with respect back to the U.S., which is interesting. And of course, we've seen some activities on that front. And then you guys have, mining in the country as well. Costa Rica generally is not a mining country, but Nicaragua is. We've obviously seen
Right.
debate in Panama about mining as well and what mining can do for economic wealth of a country, as well as raising people out of poverty or providing opportunity for people in the country. Your comments on the IBC, I do think we need to chat just briefly a little bit more about that, Michael. But I think one of the overlooked areas for people is Nicaragua as a place to organize a company and to have an international business. Again, if you have one that's just operating in other countries besides Nicaragua, it can be very beneficial. Another thing, Michael, this came up as well as you were talking that they've spurred my attention here is With the relationships, both with the West and also with, the BRIC nations, as you will, as they're starting to formalize the BRIC, group. You mentioned the Chinese investment, and hopefully a lot of that starts to happen for Nicaragua, and I think it will in due course. One of the things is it has to do with influence too in relationships. As we've seen countries that have strong relationships can tend to influence the direction of those countries. And also, we've seen a lot of other countries succumb to taking aid from outside nations and organizations, multi-government organizations. As there's a number of organizations out there that are countries are members of, like the World Bank, WEF, for example, OECD, UN, these various groups. Any comments just broadly on those groups and how they tend to leverage their policies and agendas on sovereign nations and basically, along the lines of sovereignty? I think there's a strong sense of sovereignty and national pride, if you will, in Nicaragua. And obviously that can be eroded with these outside organizations that try to press their influence. Any comments on that thinking?
I believe that all these efforts by the nations that you mentioned, organizing themselves behind different organizations and trying to influence smaller nations like the countries in Central America, I guess it's just part of the forever ongoing political game that has plagued the history of humanity from the very beginning. Since we managed to organize ourselves in tribes and later on in cities and then in nations and empires. And so I guess it's just part of the same game in the sense that the perception of having strength in numbers because of the amount of members that I have. But let me tell you, from the perspective of this region, Central America, listen, China is very far away, Andrew. And I'm going to talk to you from a very pragmatic perspective. China is very far away from this region. The United States is not. The US market is right there for us. And everyone, at some point, they need to have access to that market. I know it, you know it, our government, this government knows it. And so I can understand and I can respect the decision from by the governments of the countries in Central America to, play along with China because, China is a huge market. So we can, export what we produce over there. In the case of Nicaragua, we're going to be exporting a lot of rum and a lot of cattle and meat, which is something, and also, of course, fish and agriculture products. But at the end of the day, you have to understand that it doesn't matter how small the world nowadays is because of globalization, the distances still matter. And I guess that what you're seeing right now is that there's a sort of a shift in the balance of power in the world. I guess what Central America is doing is just, trying to play along in trying to see how we manage to get the best we can so that we can become more of a attractive and economical, more of an attractive destination for, for the development of business, but also to become to improve the quality of life for all the individuals that live here. But at the end of the day, we know these governments know that we have to learn to play also along with with the countries that are our most important commercial partners, such as North America. So those are my 2 cents for you in that regard.
There's a lot of different things at play here. I mean, you also mentioned earlier this national discrimination, nationality discrimination, which is sad. It really is silly. But obviously, people are playing along with this as the world essentially bifurcates between the West and essentially the BRICS, as you've seen. Although I would say certainly the BRICS have the momentum in terms of the membership and who's aligning with the BRICS versus the good old original West, if you will. We've seen discrimination against Russian citizens, which is odd given the circumstances. It certainly is odd, but we've seen that discrimination stretch all the way down to Central and South America. If you're a Russian citizen, just try and maybe relocate, for example, have no ties to the government and just wanting to live your life like anybody else should have the right to as well, whether it's setting up a business or trying to apply for residency or citizenship.
They can certainly come here. Nicaragua has very open arms for them, of course. Nicaragua has always have open arms for anyone, even traditional nationals from countries that have been at odds with the government in turn. Okay. What I mean by this is that back in the 80s, when Nicaragua was a communist country and basically closed down to the rest of the world, the number one, the public enemy number one around here was the U.S. There's a very funny cover in Times Magazine where the cover is completely red, and the headline is Daniel Ortega, the man who makes Reagan see red. It's a very funny cover. But anyhow, the point that I'm trying to make is that even though there was a lot of tension and confrontation between the U.S. government and Nicaragua, there was a lot of gringos moving around Nicaragua back then. So, and they were always very welcome, as they currently still are. So we have never, as you said, we don't have any restrictions, nor we discriminate anyone around here. We're friends of the world.
Good to point out because it's definitely not that open and free in some nations, and there's certainly discrimination taking place on nationality and other things that are much more sillier than that, Michael, but we'll leave that for another conversation. Let's come back to the business setup because I think that's kind of one of the main highlights aside from some of the other things you do. I mean, you obviously provide some other services as to guidance on notarization, verification, authentication services, and that as well. But among all the other stuff, real estate transactions and the other items that we mentioned just briefly, but talk
Yes,
specifically about the international business setup there in terms of the exact process. Obviously, the
sure.
benefits are, if you're not operating in Nicaragua, for example, you're not going to have a tax implication in Nicaragua. But just talk about briefly the process, benefits, and then also if you can highlight for us what that cost is expected to be to do a setup.
Sure. Setting up an IBC in Nicaragua, International Business Corporation, is can be very advantageous. Okay, let me first tell you about the benefits. You have global market access. An IBC allows you to tap into international market, access a broader customer base. You can establish a presence in multiple countries using the same corporation, expanding your business, diversify your revenue streams. Tax optimization is also a major advantage. You set up an IBC in Nicaragua, you're not going to be required to file taxes around here because basically you're not doing business in the country. You can also use the IBC to protect your assets, to use it as an asset protection tool. You can separate personal and business assets. Basically, by doing this, provide yourself with some peace of mind that you're going to be safeguarding them against potential liabilities, lawsuits, and claims by creditors. Also, confidentiality and privacy is a major thing here in play. This our jurisdiction, the confidentiality levels here are taken very seriously. So you can keep your business affairs and ownership details very confidential, even though Nicaragua is compliant with the standard regulations regarding beneficial ownership on the companies. But this information is only disclosed when requested by through the proper judicial channels. Also, another advantage of setting up an IBC here is the flexibility and ease of operations. IBCs benefit from flexible regulations, streamlined administrative procedures. You don't have to be in Nicaragua to manage the IBC. You don't have to have a physical presence in here. To keep the entity in compliance with the legal regulations, also, you don't have to be here. We can take care of that for you. And the cost is very, very, very low. Incorporating an IBC in Nicaragua comes around $1,200. Okay, that's for the incorporation, everything included here in that number. And the annual maintenance comes around $250 per year. Okay, so and talking about the specific requirements, Very simple. Obviously we need you to provide us with a name, although I'm always more than glad to help you in that regard. The name can be in Spanish or in English. You need to have a minimum of two shareholders. You need to provide us with certain information about those shareholders. We need their full name, domicile address. We need to have a copy of the passport, contact number. We need to have from you a business description. Okay, so what this company is going to be performing or doing, it doesn't have to be very specific. It can be kind of broad if you need it to be. If you're going to be using the company for to conduct business in more than one sector, shareholders, those shareholders that you're going to have, they must grant a power of representation to our staff so that we can register the corporation on their behalf. This POA, can be apostille on your jurisdiction, or you can grant it to the nearest Nicaraguan consulate if you have one. And if it's done in English, we take care of the translation to Spanish. There are certain additional information we require from whoever wants to set up an IBC related with FATCA and beneficial ownership compliance regulations. But that's about it. That's about it. So as you can see, it's very, very simple, straightforward, and very cost effective.
That gives people a bit of a flavor for the process. Fairly easy to get set up, maintain. The costs, I think, to set up and to also maintain annually are probably pretty competitive to other jurisdictions. In some cases, probably less expensive than a lot of the jurisdictions. Obviously, Nicaragua is more exotic for people because they probably haven't thought of Nicaragua as a business destination, but now they can. I think we'll stop there, Michael. And I wanted to say, really appreciate the time here to give us a flavor for Nicaragua, give us a flavor for the work that you're doing in Central America and how it fits into this world and how it can be advantageous to our members as well. And of course, our audience. If anybody in the audience wants to talk to you, just cover potentially what you can do for them briefly in summary. And if you are offering any short consultations, maybe a free 30-minute consultation or what have you, that they could potentially take advantage of.
Well, thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here and talk to you. The best way to reach to me, you find me at my contact information is at the website boltonboyer.com, or you can email me directly to mnavas, that is spells Navas at boltonboyer.com. I don't usually charge for brief initial consultations. I mean, I don't like that, okay? Because I believe that we first need to settle the fact that if I'm going to be able to help you with the goal that you're trying to reach. So once we establish that I'm going to be able to help you, then we can discuss legal fees. So you can reach out to me. No need to think about any cost in that regard. The services that you can expect from me always are, but I can provide you with a lot of information regarding how to do business in the country, how to do business even in Central America, how to set up your company, how to go about, go through the process of becoming a resident in Nicaragua or any of the other countries in Central America. We can certainly help you in that regard as well. And then, afterwards, as I mentioned before, if you decide to go ahead and set up a business in Nicaragua, whether that would be a company that would be operating in the Nicaraguan market, you can retain our services and we'll be more than glad to help you along the process of getting all your staff acquainted with the regulations regarding the taxation, labor affairs, contracts, etc. Or if you're looking at or considering the possibility of setting up an IBC because you're doing business elsewhere, I'll be more than glad to provide you with the specific requirements and help you in the process of setting up one in Nicaragua. And I'm pretty sure that you're going to see that it's a good and solid alternative. So thank you again, Andrew. It's been a pleasure to be talking with you here on your podcast.
Good to chat and cover these things off, and appreciate you giving the contact information out there. And hopefully, the audience will take advantage of potentially talking to you if they're in a situation where they're looking at internationalization, setting up a company maybe away from their home jurisdiction, and also looking to start up a business and venture out beyond their home country, which I think is pretty smart these days to look at. So, Michael, great to have you come on and talk to our audience. Thank you again, and we'll be back in touch.
Thank you, Andrew.